Cern Basher tells me that you should get pick up a Kleenex, grab, maybe you even need a towel for this because you might be crying during the next presentation, but not from sadness, from joy, because he tells me this is going to be light-hearted.
A little bit, but also
Only a
very
little.
serious. And actually, I
Oh,
think you might be crying some tears of joy here in just a second.
all right, I'm for it. Let me get,
Yeah.
I have my Kleenexes right over here. There we go.
All right. Perfect.
Okay.
All right. Let's get started. Um, Not because of this image, but we're
Oh,
required to show this.
crying
Yeah,
already. Yeah.
that's right. So Tesla owner Silicon Valley said that the Tesla robot will be the biggest product to ever launch.
Easy for you to say. Yeah.
Really hard to say. Yeah. Seems like those words are not in the right place. Of course, Elon has said this before, so Elon naturally agreed with this.
Sure.
Okay. Well, it turns out, Randy, that just like Robotaxi kind of had a quiet launch this week,
Yeah.
it appears that Optimus did as well.
Oh,
If you go to Tesla's website, apparently you can add to cart Optimus Tesla bought $29,495. It does say down here Optimus orders will begin shipping in 2 to 6 years.
2 to 6 years.
Yeah,
But they put a price tag on it.
they put a price tag on it. Now, the reality is this is a complete joke.
Oh, okay.
Linus here has, yeah, I think this is actually the Tesla bot toy that you can buy on the store, and he's doctored the website to make it look like, yeah.
Uh,
I know you were. I was excited when I first saw this too, Randy. I know the range of emotions. It's this tough, isn't it?
yeah, well, I certainly don't want it to be $29,000.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good one. Good one. All right.
Well,
Yeah.
if they sold it for that little, there would be some monthly ongoing charges for sure.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Like $10,000 a month.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, one day, Randy, we will see something like this.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind
I think that
I'm kind of looking for it by the end of the year, but I'm betting at this point I'm thinking it's going to be more like April or May of next year.
yeah, I would put probably, in my opinion, if I was to hazard a guess, well, you're talking about individual, folks like us being able to buy Optimus.
Oh, industry being able to buy it. Now, whether there's a website for that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Might be more of a one-on-one conversation.
Well,
Uh,
there's a website for Megapack, and that's $1 million purchase. So I
right.
guess there should be a website for Optimus as well. Yeah, why not? Yeah. All right. Well, back in November, the Tesla Megapack account on X said that they had built the 10,000th Megapack at Lathrop.
Hmm.
Okay, so they were celebrating that. So that was November 4th, 2024.
Hmm.
Now, as of yesterday, they announced that they had built 15,000 of them.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's almost 60 gigawatt hours of energy capacity in the last 219 days.
Okay.
Okay. Um, I'm sorry. No, 15,000 times 3.9 is almost 60 gigawatt hours.
Okay.
Okay. That's not the difference. That's just the total. Okay.
Right.
Um, so, that sounds pretty good.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of this is the run rate here. I did some calculations. The run rate's about 24 megapacks per day
Oh,
that's
okay.
being made.
Mhm.
If you take the 5,000 that was made over the last 219 days.
Okay.
Okay, or that would be 8,760 megapacks per year at that rate.
Hmm.
Again, I'm just doing calendar days, not the number of manufacturing days.
Right.
So numbers could be a little bit off. But the capacity of Lathrop is supposed to be about 10,000.
Right.
Okay. But 8,760 megapacks per year would be about 34 gigawatt hours per year. So if they're running at that, that's not quite the 40 gigawatt hour capacity, but pretty close.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that would be about $9 billion a year in revenue at that rate. Um, so things seem to be progressing here. Now we also have to factor in power walls, and power walls, I think they're producing quite a few of those. They just announced today that they're now selling into Spain
Hmm.
for Powerwall, so expanding that in Europe. It'd be interesting.
I wonder if that had to do with that big power outage they had. They were like,
Well,
okay, let's take advantage of that.
well, exactly. Spain is a perfect place for solar and batteries for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And here's just a better image, I guess, of the team celebrating that.
Okay.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So overall, I think, therefore we can say they're running pretty close to capacity at Lathrop. Whether or not they're really constrained to 10,000 or whether that's possible to increase beyond that, we don't know. And that also, gives us an idea of how long it took to get to capacity, so we can apply that to other locations as we go.
Yeah. Yeah. These numbers between the 10,000 and the 15,000 didn't, when I ran some quick calculations, didn't show, massive increase in growth in terms of the run rate
Okay.
versus what they actually reported last year.
Okay.
Now, of course, we know that there's a big discrepancy between production and reported
Right.
earnings in the energy business. So it's a little messy to really analyze, but clearly with Lathrop up and running, the Chinese factory ramping, and then a new factory being built just outside of Houston, this business is headed for some nice growth.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So you and I, Randy, we've talked a lot about the impact of robotaxis and how it's going to change the world.
Yes.
And here's kind of an interesting one. And this is kind of in your backyard or close to you. You remember the Palisades fire?
It's not easy to forget.
Yeah. So there's this whole community here, Pacific Palisades, that pretty much wiped out.
Yep.
And this is an area called Alphabet Streets. Um, Carey Street, Bashford, Galloway, Fisk, Embry, Hartselle. Pretty much all these houses are gone. So now they have to rebuild them. So, and here's kind of a map that shows all the buildings that were damaged or destroyed from the fire.
Mm.
And the extent of the fire here is kind of in pink. And there's a few buildings that were spared. That certainly here with the Alphabet Streets are really nothing. Just complete wipeout. Down in the Palisades Village itself, there's a couple of buildings that were spared, but pretty much massive destruction there as well. So now they have to, rebuild this. And so I'll just sort of share these images. They're kind of painful to look at, but, complete destruction. And it's previously just a beautiful area.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and here's some cars on Sunset Boulevard that were abandoned during the fire, and the ones on the left side of the street were destroyed, and the ones on the right were saved. And it looks like we have a Tesla here, so
Yeah. I used to live less than a mile from here.
yeah. So the question is, what happens now? So this relates to robotaxi because forward-thinking architects, and this particular architect, Steve Giannetti, he's thinking about, okay, we need to rebuild this, but we also need to think forward in terms of when we have a world with autonomous vehicles, we may not need these garages that we're building.
Right.
So let's think ahead now and plan for that and say, okay, could they be repurposed at some point in time? Now, as I understand it, the challenge that you have for permitting is it's easy to re-permit if you're building with kind of an existing footprint.
Right.
But the minute you want to make big changes, suddenly you've got permitting issues. So his idea is to build these houses much like they were, and in the back here where these garages are, eventually they could be repurposed into like cottages, or just another room for the residents of the house, right? And so he's kind of come up with some design concepts, and there's all kinds of considerations here. But the one here that, he's talking about, the cottage walk concept, right? The Cottage Walk Initiative proposes a rapid, cost-effective rebuilding strategy for the fire-affected Alphabet Streets north of the Sunset and the Pacific Palisades. It says leveraging the unique utility easements along rear property lines. This plan introduces prefab cottage-style homes to create pedestrian-friendly walking streets. Anyway, so there's a lot of really good ideas in here, but at the bottom here, he says anticipating the rise of autonomous vehicles.
Hmm.
The plan designs for a future where personal car ownership may decline. Garages currently required by permits will be built with adaptability in mind, allowing conversion into additional living space or other uses as self-driving cars reduce the need for on-site parking.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so this ensures the long-term functionality and value for homeowners. So the cottages in the rear yard allow for quick temporary housing while being built with the ability to have it work as a garage to meet present code and as additional rental housing stock for income or as a separate unit where retirees may want to move to be able to rent out the larger main house for income.
Hmm.
So hitting on a number of different things here, but it's interesting. We're seeing the impact of robotaxi already in terms of thinking by architects.
Super. I would be even more excited if he was looking at the possibility of no street in front of the homes as well.
Yeah, and that may be too much too soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? If the street was just a walking space for residents.
Right.
Yeah. And one day I'm sure that we'll see as autonomous vehicles become more, mainstream, I think we'll see some ideas like that. That becomes a possibility.
Well, and in your state, I think probably somewhere in California as well, you have those large senior communities where they're using the golf carts. And I could imagine that could be a transitional kind of look, would be where golf carts
Yeah.
are able to be, used, but not. So you have a sidewalk as opposed to a full-on street.
Yep. Yep. So anyway, it'd be interesting to see. This is just for me a really interesting sort of maybe third or second or third order implication for robotaxis.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And there's many of them. All right. Well, we didn't have any in our last show, Randy, so we're gonna cover the cartoons today. We've got two guys walking down the street. One says, "What's the latest word on inflation?" And the other guy says, "Peekaboo," with a monster hiding behind the brick wall there.
I see. I see.
Yeah. All right. Here's a good words of wisdom, I guess, for investors. We cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And we've got a bull and a bear in a sailing boat. So I guess maybe this is like Trump and Elon out sailing together. They've mended their differences and charting a course.
There you go.
That's my interpretation of the
Yeah.
cartoon. And then, the old elephant in the room joke is just never goes away. And the comment here is, looks like the 800-pound gorilla has teamed up with the elephant in the room. And he's sitting on the back of the elephant that's wearing a tariffs banner on his
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two more, Randy.
Okay. 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 Yeah.
Two guys talking here. Relax. The economic numbers are only bad if you understand them. And I figured this is actually a good cartoon for your channel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then lastly, believe it or not, we have a Tesla related cartoon this week.
Wow.
A very rare one. It may not be so well received, but it still is kind of funny. Looks like it needs a new excuse. Tesla. And I guess the comment here is, Tesla's kind of late with new products. I guess that's what they're playing on here. I don't know.
I don't know. Does it need a new excuse to come into a repair shop because it
Could be.
very rarely needs to do that? I don't know. Yeah.
Knowing the source of this, I don't know that their interpretation is as charitable as that.
I
But
see. I see. I see.
yeah. Anyway, it's nice to see that Tesla makes the cut in terms of being
Yeah.
cartoon worthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, since you brought up the business of inflation and brought up the business of understanding economic news or understanding economic information. I'm, of course, well, okay. How do I want to start this? We seem to have inflation under control. I mean, if we look at the last 4 months,
Yeah.
the CPI, the PPI, CPE, they all agree.
Yeah.
PCE, rather, PCE, all three agree. We basically have no inflation, or we're under 2% for those 4 months. And significantly under last month, popped a little bit back up this month, but not much. Certainly still under 2%. The argument that the Fed makes is that these tariffs are going to somehow pop up inflation going forward. Now, I don't know if you and I have already had this conversation, but I know you've got a really big mathematical brain. So I'm going to, if I haven't said it before, I'm going to ask you now. I'm looking at the entire the percentage of GDP for 100% of all imports is 14%.
Yep.
Now, it's not shocking because 60% of the GDP is services.
Yeah.
So you're only down to like, I think it's 30% that is goods. And so the fact that it's only 14% of the GDP is imports, I think it's a fair number. Pretty much all the economists, especially after the China decision yesterday, the China almost agreement yesterday, most economists believe that the overall rate of tariffs will be about 15%, which is, I'm just going to take the whole 15% because we already had some tariffs in place. I'm not going to say a 15% increase. I'm going to say, I am going to say 15% increase as opposed to 15% total, a 15% increase. Now, I think that all I have to do is multiply those two. So if I multiply,
Well, yeah. Go ahead. Yep.
if I multiply 15% times 14%, I get 0.8%. So that the maximum, assuming that 100% of all the tariffs are passed on to consumers at the same rate. In other words, they're not the manufacturers, distributors, all the importers, they don't take advantage of the situation and raise prices higher than the percentage that they had a raise on the tariff. If it's just the same, then the maximum impact on the GDP would be 0.8%. Am I missing something?
No, I think that's right. And you haven't even talked about any of the offsetting effects.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jeff Lutz and I have spent hours talking about that. Maybe you and I have talked about the fact that a lot of times it's not passed through by the manufacturer, the importer, the wholesaler, whoever it is that's importing it. Commonly, they don't even get the full impact of the tariff because the producer in Asia or in Europe lowers their price in
Yeah.
order to take some of the heat off of the tariff amount. So, and there's other, and again, it may be that there's no price elasticity, that the product would stop selling if they raise the price by 15%. So they don't raise the price by 15%.
Well, that's a big thing in terms of substitution effect, and that's not
Yes.
right. If something has suddenly gone up 15%, if it's possible, people will often switch. Certainly, we see this with food a lot,
Right.
right? If the price of steak goes up by 15%, people switch to chicken,
Right.
right? That kind of stuff is a no-brainer, and that happens all the time. And that's
Oh,
why a lot of the food inflation really isn't such a big deal. When egg prices went through the roof, a lot of people stopped eating eggs for a while.
right. Right. Yeah.
Fine.
Especially at a buck an egg.
Yeah.
Seemed a little strange. Okay. So in fact, people were buying chickens. There was a whole bunch of folks that were going out
Yep.
and buying chickens because for the first time they became farmers. Okay. So if the maximum potential is 0.8%, and that would be over the year.
Yeah.
So let's just divide that by 4. That would be 0.2% per month. So it doesn't look to me like the impact on inflation at its maximum. And I'm thinking,
0.2% per quarter.
I'm sorry, I said that wrong.
Yeah.
0.2% per quarter would the maximum impact by these tariffs can't be anything nearly what people are talking about in terms of needing to hold back on, say, interest rate drops by the Fed.
Right.
Again, is all of that true? You're the first person that I trust to ask this this question. Am I making sense here?
No, you are making sense. And of course, there's all kinds of other factors, but I think for the most part, they're offsetting factors. They're not adding to it,
Yeah,
right? There's just the inflationary forces in the economy. So if we have, higher cost imports coming in, that may cause some people to say, well, I'm just not going to buy that pick a product today
right.
because it's now 15% more. I'm going to wait.
Yeah,
So you have a slowing of demand
right.
for those products. You have a substitution in many cases to other products,
Mhm.
right? And that helps sort of mitigate the inflationary effects. You have the producers themselves that are absorbing a lot of it. And I think there's a lot of debate about how much that is, but it's in the end probably quite a bit,
Mhm.
right? Because the people that they're selling to are expecting a certain price uh, with or without a tariff. And so the producer sort of has to satisfy that,
Right. So,
right?
so this causes me to, and I recognize that the Fed pays a lot of attention to perceived increases in inflation, or the public and the business community's concerns about future inflation. But it turns out that on the most watched uh, 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 survey on this, which was the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, it turns out that there was a massive difference between what Republicans thought and what Democrats thought. And the total, even for the monthly one, which is the one that takes the entire month of surveying into account, they only have 500 people in that survey. So with 500 people, they are finding that the Democrats think that the inflation is going to be up around 9% later this year, which is about as nonsensical as anything I can possibly imagine. And if I was a social psych major, you're doing that kind of an analysis, you throw out that data because it makes no sense.
No.
But the Republicans might have been closer to right because they thought inflation later this year would be 1.5%, which it looks like it might end up being. So we've got survey data that's completely useless, and you've got the real data, which is now under 2%, clearly under 2%. And then you have this business of how the Fed themselves would want to analyze what it might look like second half of this year or going into next year. And I can't find any way to get it, the tariffs at least, to be increasing it by more than let's say by, if I really want to exaggerate, maybe it impacts it by, instead of 1.5, we get 1.7 some month, or maybe every month.
Yeah, I would say just the normal fluctuation in inflation sort of, probably washes over any of the tariff impact changes in gasoline prices or whatever, can
Yeah.
happen during the summer and that kind of thing that impact things. Yeah, for me, it's not really a big deal. I think a lot of this has just been political theater to try to scare people about, what Trump is or isn't doing, right? And that's one of the key things in politics is just to manufacture a lot of fear,
So
right?
if President Trump yesterday or this morning actually was this is a Thursday, so Thursday morning, President Trump was complaining again about the need to drop this by 1%. Besant was also before Congress, I think that was also Thursday, complaining about it and saying that the 1% drop in the Fed rate potentially could save a huge amount of money on the budget, which would be also reducing potential future inflation, um, reducing the overall deficit. I mean, all the potential positives that would come from that, forgetting how it might impact my mortgage, forgetting how it might impact the price of a car, maybe it stimulates the economy, et cetera. All those things, just set those aside.
Yeah.
Just dropping it is likely to give the bond market an excuse to drop the 10-year, or all of them across the board for that matter, to drop some of these amounts that are being paid. And that's going to save the budget a lot of money, which is a benefit to all Americans.
Yeah, the bond market's probably a little bit worried about government spending from either party. Neither party has been particularly careful about spending U.S. taxpayer dollars now for quite some time. And so the bond market sees that, and that's probably one of the issues why the 10-year is higher than where a lot of people think it should be. um, that is an issue. And so certainly finding ways to reduce interest rates is in everybody's interest. But the government, our politicians need to do their part in inspiring some confidence that they've got spending under control.
Okay.
And I don't know when the last time that we all felt confident that that was the case. It's been a while.
There does appear to be 1.5 trillion in savings. That's the CBO. The CBO seems to be agreeing on that number. So
Yep.
that's certainly not nothing. But
Right.
the other thing, and again, I'll just asking you because these are numbers issues. You don't have to be an economist. You just take the numbers that we're being given and do the math. The CBO says that they're scoring based on 1.7% GDP growth. If we even had kind of what people think it's going to be 3%, but let's just go with 2.7. I believe I heard somebody, a senator or a congressman today say that that alone would add 3 trillion in revenue over the next 10 years, or 300 billion a year.
Yeah.
So if you combine that with the 150 billion cut in expenses and also the difference in what we might be paying in interest, which would cut the amount of the total budget. I mean, you're really starting to get close to something that would look like balance within a couple of years.
Growth is key. Growth is absolutely key, and we want Elon focused on growth, Robotaxi and Optimus. Those two products have the opportunity to really help accelerate GDP growth.
All right, so
Yep.
so you're a math whiz, and you just agreed with my numbers as they stand today, as best as you understand.
The back of the envelope numbers, I agree with you conceptually. This is a very complex topic.
Oh
I
yeah,
haven't really dug into these government numbers in any material way. I
right.
know AJ's done some work on this,
Yes, he has.
right? But yeah, I agree with the gist of what you're saying there, Andy.
And we have also the one I forgot, the one I didn't put in there was what we talked about a minute ago, right now appearing to be about $300 billion a year in tariffs.
Yeah.
So the 300 billion in tariffs, 300 billion a year in increased income taxes because of the GDP growth, 150 billion a year in savings in terms of the actual budget, the budget savings that they're already showing, and 300 billion maybe a year in savings and interest on the debt. You're talking about over a trillion a year before we get to the Doge cuts.
And have you seen any estimates in terms of what increased exports might bring in?
I have not seen anything on that yet.
That's one thing I find it interesting that people haven't really talked about.
Mhm.
We've seen some of these trade deals, in Saudi Arabia and UAE, right? Buying NVIDIA chips and Boeing aircraft and all kinds of things.
Right,
How much is that going to add to the GDP?
right, right.
I'd be curious about that too.
Okay, well, you know what? I appreciate you going through those numbers with me because up till now, I feel like I'm not that people don't comment on it on these videos and on X, but I just really am glad to have, it seems like those make sense, and I can't figure out. I can't. I'm having a little bit of a hard time figuring out why that isn't obvious to somebody like Rand Paul, and even to the Democrats who obviously are looking for anything they can do to thwart what Trump wants or what Trump is proposing. But it just seems like this is a very, 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 very good potential outcome for the country.
I think in the end it could be favorable. I would like it to be. Um, my wish is always that things are less political than they are, but that's probably a wish that's never going to happen. Um, but yeah, no, I think that things, overall are not, for the people that think that we're heading off a cliff, I don't think that's the case.
Right.
For the people that thought we were going to some economic nirvana, I'm not sure that's the case. We tend to just kind of muddle through, and that muddling through for the United States is usually pretty strong growth,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I'd be very happy with 1990s growth, but I have a sneaky suspicion that it's going to be way more than 1990s growth this time, if we can believe any of the Kathy Wood, all in
Yeah.
BG2, these kind of guys that are way smarter than I am. All right. Speaking of way smarter than I am, Cern Basher, thank you for coming on and helping me with those numbers, but also entertaining us with some of your slides. and also giving us some wisdom, I hope.
The final thing I would add too, Randy, is I think we need to come up with a measure of GDP that's, excludes Elon Musk and his companies, and then GDP including Elon's contribution.
I bet you could do
Would, wouldn't that be fun to calculate?
that. Yeah, yeah, especially looking forward. Take it to
Yeah,
2030
that's right.
and subtract that. Yeah, that I can imagine slides in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. No, hopefully, maybe there's a spreadsheet in my future in terms of tracking that.
All right, Cern,
Yep.
as always, thank you so much for coming on. I know you've got other places to be. So let me let you out of here now. And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Randy.